Well, let me introduce Jack Doodle, not Doodle, it's Jodel,
That'll.
who owns Ipswich Hobbies. I apologize, Jack. I'll get it right one of these years. And he's going to do a build along of one of his kits, the section house. So, Jack, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jim. The first 2 weeks of the presentations, we talked about making a plan for the section house, and wall bracing some of the floors, priming and staining and distressing walls. Last week, we talked about installing some shutters or windows and some of the framing. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the doors. As you may, well, you should know, unless you're new to the new tracks the last couple of weeks, we are building the Ipswich Hobbies section house kit in 3 scales. Interesting to me because I never built all 3 scales at the same time before on the do-overs here. N, HO, and O scale. The bottom left is a photograph showing the, the section house or speeder shed, whatever you want to call it, the larger door. Then we have 2, I used to call them man doors, but I think the more people are starting to call them people doors or something else. This photograph on the right shows a O scale version, how it was framed last week. And the middle photograph just shows that I put extra bracing in almost everything. Here you can see on the white, on that middle, is the just corner trim. And painted in that dark brown prime color is the bracing that matches the roof line. And then on the right-hand side matches the back wall. These are 2 walls of the back shed. Top left, that's my pink-colored nail file that I use for some light sanding. And I try to sand just about every side of every piece. This next slide shows you the N-scale version where I'm going vertical. And that's the theme of today, really, is going vertical. Usually it's best to align 2 walls. That's best illustrated in the middle photograph. And then marrying those 2 walls together to complete the 4 walls that you see on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, this is the N-scale version, by the way. Notably, you can see the N-scale version. If you recall from last week, it's all has boarded up windows. The shutters or just plywood covering the windows. And this shows the 3-sided, 2 sides of the 3-sided addition in the top right corner. And we'll be talking later about this center beam, this roof support that is right down the middle of that right-hand photograph. Going vertical HO, you can see here that I've tried to make sure that the floors fit and that the bracing doesn't interfere with the floors that slide in. So when we measured the bracing for the inside, we had to make sure we had an allowance for the floor to fit under the bracing. Why isn't that bracing piece here primed like the others? Well, I end up adding bracing practically all the way through my build sometimes because I'm not sure. In some cases, if I'm going to have an open door or a closed door, and I'm always sensitive to being able to see bracing from the inside. So I generally try to paint my bracing early on if I know I'm going to have an open door. Here, I just had to deal with a little bit more warping than I expected, so I added some extra bracing. Going vertical, oops, I think I skipped one. No, yeah, the right-hand side, let's see my views, if I can minimize, there we go. On the right-hand side is the HO scale version showing the full walls vertical. And again, I use the two walls, and then marry two walls together to go vertical on those and make sure the floor fit in each of those. We talked about the door a little while ago. You can see the man door, or the person door on the front. And I typically, except the end scale, I typically leave a door open or at least partially open. Sometimes I'll cut a door in half and save the other half for a future kit. And these little markings on the door and on the door frame, those are just to suggest some door hardware. Okay. I don't know if somebody had a question, but we'll move on. Going vertical O scale. The O scale version has a notch under we'll call it the freight door. It's really the speeder door that I have slid over to the side. And it's notched in here so that the front wall fits over parts of the floor, and then parts go all the way to the bottom. And that's best illustrated by the bottom left photograph. You can see this clapboard goes all the way to the ground, whereas with the man door and the speeder door they'll rest on top of the floor. The middle photograph on the bottom that just shows two walls and the front wall. Deviating from what I said a moment ago about marrying two L's, that is a side wall and a front wall, plus a side wall and a back wall. Because it had a notch in the floor that required a little rejiggering here, I put the two side walls butting up against the front wall just to make sure that it had a good fit up front. And that's illustrated on the photograph on the right side. Corner bracing, you see these four rectangles. I'm pretty much a belt and suspenders person when it comes to modeling, especially since quite a few of my models I bring to train shows. Here you can see where I've just cut scrap wood, placed them in the corner. That helps to ensure that I can initially have and then maintain 90 degree angles. And you'll notice that I have a notch in the corner to make sure that I can fit around any corner trim that might be exposed on the inside. So I've gotten into the habit of using those just from my pile of scrap wood. Going vertical again, I know this just shows that floor tucking in under the bracing. And same thing on the right-hand side. One thing that we'll discuss next week is some of the optional upgrades that you can do to a kit, such as maybe adding a loft as a second floor here. And the photograph to the right shows all four walls vertical. And you can see where I've got the initial vertical bracing. And in here, the unpainted part. I went in after and painted some of the added bracing, but you can see here where some of it's unpainted. That just suggests that I added it later. Roof center support beam. We'll be doing the roof in next week's build, but in preparation for next week's roof application or installation, where we have some scrap wood, sometimes I include this in the kit, but if not, just use your own at home to join two extra supports side to side in the buildings. This is the N scale building. And you can see here, especially in the right-hand photograph, and the top of that support beam, I've cut out a flat area in the center, and that's so that the smoke jack can rest on it when I put it through the roof. And the smoke jack, the N scale version is shown on the left-hand photograph down there on the bottom. We'll be talking about those additional details next week. And on the left side, this is the O-scale version. Left side shows that installed beam before I've cut the notch. I should have cut it before I glued that together. And here is a better view of cutting out that flat notch. A lot of people either are not familiar with a smoke jack or they confuse it with a chimney. Chimney is basically, aside from a brick chimney that you'll see on a home, or more of a pipe type chimney that you'll see poking through a roof. The smoke jack has a bit of a fan at the base of it, and so the rising gases will trigger a fan inside that helps to ventilate some of the smoke or some of the other gases that are inside the building. And one tool that I forgot to mention in I think week one of this presentation is have a good stash of rubber bands. I often use rubber bands to brace up a building. And here's a good example of it on the right. Sometimes I put so many rubber bands on the structure that I actually have to cut the rubber bands to remove them. Otherwise, I risk damaging the model when I try to take them off. The section house has a shed to it. The shed is very simple because there's no windows and there's one door that lets you have it open. Pretty much is a closed 3-wall piece that butts right up against the back end of the section house. And you can see here, this is the end scale, as evidenced by the boarded up windows. One thing that I'll mention here, as you see in the blue arrows in the note to the side, when the addition gets married right up to this back wall, this center trim, this corner trim on the main building, sits right here next to just left of the door. But I add interior bracing. Again, it's the old belt and suspenders. I put more interior bracing once those two sections, those two buildings are added. Let me point out here too, you see how thick these walls look? O scale, N scale, HO scale. Very often the thickness of the walls is pretty much the same. So close up in a picture like this, especially an N scale building, can look a little bit clunky. But once it's all covered up with the roof, it looks fine. You can see too with the corner trim, sometimes the HO pieces are used for N scale and sometimes even upscale to O. So not all the pieces perfectly scale out as they would if you were doing a flat-on museum architectural piece. Here's the HO version of the shed. You can see again just 3 basic pieces. The trim it doesn't really matter if you put the trim on the side or if you put both trim pieces on the back wall. Top left photograph, I have a large sheet of sandpaper that I've glued down to about a 1 square foot piece of board. And virtually every piece that I have in any of my assemblies, I sand virtually every side. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see where in this old scale build-up, how the back addition just butts right up against the main building. And you can see the extra bracing that I've added here that follows the roof line. And that is it. Next week, we're going to pick right up and talk about the roof trim, rafter tails, putting on the rolled roofing, and then doing some super detailing. And then we're also going to do a show and tell of some of the customer bills, including some of the participants on this show. So if you have any questions,
I just wanted to say that boxing your corners like that, with the piece of strip wood in the corner,
yes.
that's a great technique. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
It solves a lot of problems with some clapboard siding and things.
Yes, yeah. The trick is just to make sure you have a 90-degree piece of wood.
Yeah, everything has to be square, but I mean,
Yes.
that's
Exactly.
a neat technique
Yep.
that I shall use.
Good, thanks.
Even an old dog can learn new tricks.
Oh, yes.
Jack, you did a great job. Thank you so much. And Tom, I guarantee you the little blocks in the corners, it actually works. It makes the lineup so much simpler, so much easier. And I tell you, I had, I've been doing it so long, Jack, I had forgotten that. And so I'm glad that you brought that tip back up, because a lot of people can benefit from that one tip.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to try it.